Hello, everybody. I'm very, very happy to be here today with Dr. Vinicius Mariano de Carvalho, a senior lecturer at the Brazil Institute in King's College London. And I will tell you a little bit about him, and then we shall proceed to have a talk about the current situation of the fires in the Amazon region. Um, he studied literature and theology in Brazil, and he received his PhD from Passau University in Germany. And he is also educated and has published in music and musicology, and is a professional conductor. Vinicius has many talents. He has also served in the Brazilian army, serving the military technical corps. And he developed projects regarding Brazilian military history and military music. Thank you very much for being with us today, Vinicius. And I would like you to tell our audience about the current situation in Brazil, because we hear many rumors, we read many uninformed opinions, and we hope that you can give us a more precise account of what is actually happening.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to share some ideas or perceptions with you all. And I hope that after our conversation today, we can have a better picture of the situation, how it is today, especially in the Amazonian region in Brazil, and probably also looking more broadly what are the consequences internally and externally of this crisis that Brazil is facing today, especially related to the fires going on in the Amazonian region. I apologize from the beginning if my talk here, my conversation, will be not extremely political engaged and like trying to blame and finding easy answers for problems that are much more complex than we are seeing today. So that's a little bit what I'm preparing this background for the conversation here. No? So regarding what we are seeing in the fires in the Amazon today, first we need to locate that historically, and then secondly, why it's been so addressed by the media internationally today. And I think the third term is the third point is what are the consequences for the future of the region and also for the international relations of Brazil. Well, Amazonian region, just to give an idea, what we call Amazonia in Brazil, it is also a state of the Federation of Brazil. The Amazonian state is the biggest one in Brazil. And also the biome, or let's say, the area that share the same natural characteristics that we call Amazonian region too. This Amazonian region is not confined into Brazilian borders, not only Brazilian. We have other Latin American countries, South American countries such as Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, that share the same nature aspect, same biome of the Amazonian. We also talk about Amazonia in Brazil in legal terms. There is a definition of legal Amazonia that encompasses all the states in which we have the Amazonia rainforest, the biome Amazonic, but also some parts that today, when we look at the map, are not anymore included in this area. So those three elements should be considered here. First, the legal one, the second one, the biome, and the state of the Amazonia. As I said, historically, Amazonian region has been victim of a process of deforestation. We didn't have in Brazil a march to the west, but we have a march up to the north, expanding the agricultural borders of Brazil. So historically, all the idea of development, economical development in Brazil was building up, coming from the southeast region and growing up more and more to the north, and forcing the expansion of this area used for agriculture in Brazil, especially mass production of agricultural production. And then we should say here both the cattle and also the soybean plantations, for instance. Well, also historically, Brazil built up the economical pattern of the country in agribusiness. So in commodities, Brazil is the biggest exporter of soybeans in the world today. Countries like China depend a lot on Brazilian exports of soya. European countries also. The same thing happens with many other countries in our environment, South America. So for Brazilian economy to grow in the model that we have established, the growing of the plantations are a necessity too. And then this forcing of expanding this border, it is a process of continuation in Brazil that follows this pattern of development. So we need to develop the region, normally increasing or improving the expansion of these agricultural zones. Also historically, fires in this region have been used to clean areas and transform those areas that previously have been forest into areas for plantation or for cattle. So that we have here a very serious issue that we need to discuss. It's not only this fire that are happening today, but it's a model of economic development and use of the space that have economical revenues for the country. So conservation, it is part of that. It's a historical fight. It is a fight that I think Brazil started to have more consciousness about. Around the 80s, when we had the Constitution of 1988, was a period of severe deforestation in the region, and the social consciousness about the need of preserve nature drove into the development of several laws to preserve and to protect the jungle at that time. Also, the development of numerous NGOs that work in the support of the preservation. Also, it's the same period that we have a strong development of indigenous policies in Brazil, the changing of the indigenous statutes in the Brazilian constitution. It's all around the same period. So what we have here is, in one side, development of an economic pattern that is based on agribusiness and expanding more and more and need more land to expansion. In the other side, lots of social demands, environmental demands, conservationist demands, and consciousness about the need of conservation of the region. So those two forces have been constantly moving from one side to another and assuring that, well, Brazil is having a development, economic development according to this model, and in the other side, managing also to get some sort of conservation of the jungle. So that is, I think, the historical picture of that. As I said, every year, around this time of the year, when it's the dry period, starting of the dry period in the Amazonian region, many landowners put fire in the land to clean and prepare for plantation. And what we had this year, it was a multiplication of spots of firing in the region. A multiplication that we haven't seen previously. It's not that this year we achieved the highest period of deforestation because of fire, but the numerous spots of fire in the region. And that triggered a worry. So what we are doing here, what's happening? Are we really looking at the Amazonian as a place that should be expanded in the production side, or are we really looking at it as an area that needs to be conserved? So the government that was established in Brazil in January, that was elected last year, it's a government that has a clear perception about development for the Amazonia, about the need of implement some policies among the region, among the population in the region, that according to this government will promote the development of the region, again the word development, touching here.
Yes.
And this government, apparently by a series of policies that has been in place since the beginning of the government, didn't look at that and the side of the preservation so well at this moment. And surely what we had in the last 2 weeks was that these fires, or the consequence of these fires, got international proportion in the point of view of perception, and the government didn't foresee that coming. So in crisis management, the government was very bad, not seeing that the explosion of these fire spots would be damaging the Brazilian international image. A series of events that precede that, including the contestation by the government of data provided by the Brazilian National Institute for Space Research that overlook the Amazonian area for firing. So that creates the impression that the government really don't want to care about the Amazon as a region that needs to be preserved. And then we had a crisis, and as I said, the management of this crisis was not orderly done, and the strategic communication that should be surround the issue like that was definitely not carefully looked. And we start to see all newspapers in the world posting news about the deforestation in Brazil as something that had never happened in that proportion before. So I think here again it's necessary to shape this and to understand that those fires they have been happening historically, and the consequence of those fires we know it is reducing jungle, it's reducing the forest. And what are the consequences in long term for that? We know that the Amazonian rainforest is the most diverse part of the world, a biodiverse part of the world. We have no idea yet all the possible research, or not research, but the possible outcomes that can have from the jungle. We don't know exactly what is the potentiality of all the resources that the jungle has. We also know that the impact for the global climate, the impact of reduction of the rainforest, it's immense, will change globally the weather, the climate, and consequently, it is not something that just is related to Brazil, but again, will have an international impact here. The conservation of the Amazonia, it is not only in this case thinking about Brazilian development, but it has to do with the full existence of the world as we know. And then that is an important point to keep in mind also. No? Well,
and can you tell us a little bit about the conflict that emerges when external agents wish to intervene, and the way that this is received by Brazilian nationals, and the question of national sovereignty?
Yeah, that's a very good point indeed. Well, of course, as I said, that the impacts for deforestation are global, but we should not forget that the Brazilian Amazonia is Brazilian. It is part of the Brazilian territory, and Brazil is the only country that will exert sovereignty over this region. So, either left or right wing in Brazil, everybody will agree that the Brazilian Amazonian is Brazilian. So, when we see this discourse, like we have seen recently, that some countries or some agents proposing that the Amazonia should be looked by an international agency or as a global home, that will touch very seriously the reactions of the Brazilian population and Brazilian politicians, both left or right. And those countries or those people, the Brazilian people, they will not accept that naturally. So the impact or the idea that that we would have an internationalized Amazonia, it's out of question. And I think that any country in the world would understand that, in the sense that nobody will open hand of sovereignty of big part of its territory because of international pressure over that. So that's again what I was saying in the beginning, how this fact now also trigger a much more complex international relations issue that has to do about sovereignty of the region and the capabilities of the Brazilian government of dealing with that. That's, I think, a main important point to keep the eyes on.
Because one of the reactions were very emotional, and people were comparing the burning of Notre Dame donations immediately, billionaires, etc. And the reaction to the news of the Amazon burning, in the same way, in some cases there were offers, you can make a donation here or you can make a donation there, as if it were a natural disaster, which is not quite that.
Again, what is also very interesting about this crisis now, it's the amount of misinformation, misunderstanding, and misopinion about what's going on there. No? So first of all, it is not a natural disaster. It's not something that we couldn't foresee there. So what is needed in the case of the Amazonia? It's clear policies, very clear policies that will assure that the conservation of the nature is a very important part of the Brazilian reality and identity. But again, Amazonia, it's the Brazilian Amazonia, it is part of Brazilian identity. So Brazil needs to show clearly, in the point of view of image, strategic communication, and policies, that is taking care of that, is taking care of what is important for Brazil. This really point of the Amazonia. The second aspect here, it's important to start to see that preservation and conservation, it's also profitable. So we need to understand how, in a logic of the capitalism, we can have, conserve, preserve, and keep and grow the Amazonia and make profit of that. So no one can say that Amazon is not being developing or not returning to the producer. No, exactly. So again, it is a need of a change of policies. It's not something like a cathedral that burnt and you rebuild, or you put down and rebuild a new one, and then you need some specific money for that. Again, we can have a lot of money. If we don't have policies, we don't know what to do with this money. This money will disappear in ways that we need to discuss here. But the point, again, I will reinforce, is what we need necessarily, it is a very clear discussion inside Brazil, in the countries that share the same Amazonian biome, about how we see and how can we have the Amazonian, preserve the Amazonian, how can we dialogue with international actors that also can support the preservation of the Amazonian, respecting the Brazilian sovereignty on that area. Also, internally, we need to have a very clear discussion that those policies will not emanate directly from Brasilia, the capital only, but also from the local actors, those who live in the Amazonia, those who are there forever, and they are indigenous groups, several of them, with different perceptions of the world, different ways of dealing and living with the jungle. They are the riverine population that are there for centuries also, living from the jungle and to the jungle, those people that are directly involved in the life of the region. So again, we cannot compare with burning of a cathedral. And for more that we think that's poetical to say things like that, those are in some way useless comparisons. As well as, for instance, many people say, oh, the Amazon is the lungs of the world. No?
Yes.
Well, this is a poor metaphor. It doesn't say anything. No? And by the way, the lungs, they actually consume oxygen and transform oxygen and CO2. So if we compare Amazon with that, it's actually causing more damage than help. So it's a sort of poor metaphor that doesn't help indeed to understand the need, the complexity, and the importance of the Amazonia here. And I think what we should be looking at is ways of promoting political dialogue that will promote also political change in the perception on how to hold Amazonia, both in the perspective of Brazil, in the perspective of inside Brazil of those who are related, who are from the region, our neighboring countries that also share the same biome, and the global as a whole. Because again, what happens there
starting these fires will need to have a vision of how they can develop in other ways, I suppose.
Yeah, that's again another serious issue here, no? And the clear answer, who are starting those fires? You know, those could be landowners that want to expand their area. Those could be simple riverines that every year they burn where they plant to clean again the terrain and plant again. So it is necessary a very close looking at the situation. It's necessary to have a very serious investigation at the federal level, showing clearly why intensification of these fires spots this year, what sort of motivation were behind that, if these motivations are political, how can we deal with that in a political way also, and if they are illegal, how to deal that in a legal way. So in this point, I must say that we should reinforce the institutions. We should reinforce the institutions responsible for the fiscalization of the regulations of the Amazonian rainforest. We should reinforce the capabilities of the organisms, the governmental organisms responsible for the protection and preservation of the region. We should reinforce the public arena, the public space where the local population have their voice and can dialogue what they understand is good for the region as a whole.
So, in a way, it constitutes a lesson to other countries on how to deal with their own natural reserves.
Yeah,
An extreme example, I suppose.
yeah. It's so curious because one of the reactions of the Brazilian government when things start to get with this global proportion was exactly to say to Europe, look, you have destroyed your natural coverture, your forests a long time ago, due to the industrial revolution, basically. And now you are trying to teach lessons to Brazil how to preserve our own jungle. And the argument used is like, look, the Amazon jungle today in Brazil, the rainforest only in Brazil, it's bigger than Western Europe. We are not talking about a small spot of land. We are talking about a region that is much bigger than what Europeans understand as space. And according to the Brazilian argument, some of Brazilians' arguments is like, we've been quite good in conserving that. This is still 52% of Brazilian territory that it's with this rainforest. So actually we are doing well. That's the argument used by Brazil to respond to this accusation that Brazil is not doing well in preserving the jungle. No? Well, I will not get into the merits if it's right or not, if it's a good argument or not. I just say that there is a point there. And of course, again, we are coming here to the point of development or economic development. What and how we want this development happen in Brazil is the same model of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. Destroy the natural resources in order to industrialize is the increasing of agricultural production in industrial scale as we are seeing, or are we keen to look for alternatives in economic development that will represent also social development for the local communities, that will challenge a little bit the logic that has been implemented until now. And we insist on this point.
But also, of course, the amount of interference or the sense of entitlement that other countries have to give their opinion comes from a growing global consciousness. And you see pictures that were published by NASA showing the extent of the fires and that sort of thing. So in a way, it is also a clash of historical models of nationality as well, pushing in the direction of a global sort of sense of responsibility, and at the same time still dealing with the 19th century model of what a nation is and borders, etc.
Yeah, I think this crisis now, it will be a very good moment for a global examination of their own behavior towards the world, towards the planet, not only for Brazilians. We should look more careful. I think we are seeing more and more these worries about climate change here coming to the everyday life of the people in Europe. It's not only scientists that are discussing that. People are suffering and seeing that happening. And so this global consciousness about the need of nature conservation is getting to a point that, yeah, it's a political issue that's been discussed in elections now, or it's been an issue that's been discussed in international relations now. So that's a very, very interesting point, and perhaps one positive aspect that we can bring from this crisis now. Again, another point here is we saw lots of images from these events. Some of them old pictures, some of them fake news. So what we are seeing also, it's a need for a more clear model of communication in which we can be prevented from give fake opinions based on fake news. I think it's a very important element here. And again, it is a responsibility of a government to shape the clear, trustful information about what's going on, because that's the only way that we will prevent fake news or fake information about such a serious issues like the fires in the Amazon nowadays. So we are confronting the world is confronting with this new reality of communication, this new reality of getting informed about issues like the Amazonian, that, as I said, it's been happening for quite a long time, but surely we got an interest on that. You know? And why? It's because of NASA showed some pictures about that. What triggered this international commotion about that? That's one point. The second point has to do again with this need of a national and international consciousness about what we want for a planet as a whole.
And that has to be an international dialogue, right?
It's always an international dialogue. I think we are living in some interesting times in which more than ever, every single issue in every single part of the planet becomes an international issue. You know? So conflicts that are happening today in some parts of the Middle East, they have impact here because of migration, because of a mass mobilization of people moving out from these areas. So we are living in a period in which there is no more national issues that don't have international implications. So that must be clear. And any government should look at that, not in a worries of losing the national identity or whatever. But again, we need to try to bring that international issue to a national discussion. And there is no solution, for instance, for the migration crisis in Europe if we don't solve wars happening in Yemen, for instance. Same way, there will be no solutions for the salvation of the Amazonian if we don't discuss that internally in Brazil also. So it is not an international decision that will change what the policies are happening inside Brazil only. It will depend a lot of this Brazilian mobilization, engagement, and again, since that the Amazonian is a Brazilian territory, and therefore it is under Brazilian sovereignty the decision of that.
Okay, excellent. Do we have any questions? No. I think it's a very difficult topic with many angles that we can only begin to imagine, and that have got to do with a changing model, as you say, of communications, but also of the way people interact at an international level, and how these waves of information are very quick to establish similarities where there are none. One fire is equal to another fire. The burning of a monument, the burning of land, of forest land. And as I was reading, there are similar fires going on right now in sub-Saharan Africa, possibly with similar purposes, that have got to do with a moment in development in which the agricultural model is still central, where many trade agreements are at stake.
Yeah.
As you were saying, for example, with the exportation of Brazilian soya to China, and all sorts of consequences. So in that sense, it's moving very fast. And I believe that one of the reasons why this has been such a topic of conversation has got to do with that speed.
Yeah.
And people beginning to question what it is to be, if you agree, like a global citizen.
Yeah, and there is another point that I would like to bring into the talk and the conversation is it has to do with the ephemeral aspect of it. As I said, Amazon is burning for quite a long time. Deforestation is happening sometimes faster than some other years, but it's happening there. Today, we are looking at that as a very apocalyptic thing happening in Brazil right now. How long will take or will long our consciousness about that and our worries? How long will we will keep talking, discussing, and trying to do something about that? I'm afraid, but I think that in 2 weeks' time we will be not talking about that anymore. We will have some other subject to be discussing, and if you come in here again, we will be talking about I don't know what. But the point is, it's so important issue, and it's so important that it came to the spot not right now. And how we will keep that being discussed as a political transformation for the region, and not only as some mediatic subject to be explored and to get lights all over the world. So how ephemeral will be this phenomenon? It will be really an international change of consciousness about climate change, about conservation, and about models of economic development that we have been living on, or we just follow the news and let's see what's the next crisis that we'll be discussing.
The next big thing, yes. So we're coming to a point when we trivialize everything because there's another big thing that needs our attention under that. Yes. So we require really radical, I suppose, transformation.
Indeed.
Very well. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, Vinicius. I hope we have well, I certainly do, but I hope the audience also has a clear idea of what is going on, especially that it is not simplistic, it is not unilateral, no, it's multi-layered, and we should stop and reflect to educate ourselves to have a more informed way of reacting to this kind of information.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me here to talk to you. And again, I hope that the ideas that I brought here help us to see this situation in a broader picture of Brazil. I would recommend everybody who haven't been to go one day to the Amazonian region to really see for themselves what is this part of the world, of this part of the country, in the case of Brazil, and to have this first-hand experience. And the dimension that the Amazonia has also. I think this is a very important part of or a very, very important way of really understanding what is the situation there. It's going and see the region in itself. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.